former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
It was great joining host Jason Bermas on TNT Radio. You can find him weekdays, 3 to 5 p.m. Jason happened to be from Fort Plain, which is in the neighboring county to where I am, Fulton County, New York, in upstate. Jason graduated Fort Plain High School and found himself in mid-country, Midwest, and he has a daily program. And so it was really interesting, the connection when we were so close. We're half an hour away from each other's towns. So kind of neat. In any event, we discussed the DNC. We discussed some of the issues that I anticipated and he anticipated. And we discussed support, law enforcement support for Kamala Harris and her vice presidential running mate. What I do want to highlight is as you listen to the tape, they talked about two things. I believe there were going to be delegates inside the convention who would hold signs or protests within the convention itself. I had the opportunity to interview two delegates to the Democratic National Convention, Tom DiNapoli, who's a New York State Controller and an excellent individual, and also Ed Jasowitz, who's the Fulton County Democratic Chairman. They explained to me, Ed did, that during the convention there was a lot of screening. So they screened for signs coming in, they screened individuals coming in, and you had to show your credentials more than once. So there was very tight security inside of the convention hall, which I anticipated. I didn't think about screening of signs, so that's one that I was a little bit off on, but I think it's important, because that's how they kept the signs from getting in there and disrupting the convention. So it was a very well-run convention from a security standpoint. There was only one evening where some protesters turned into rioters, and they tore down a fence, and law enforcement was pretty busy with that. As I look at this through the lens as a sheriff, prior to that as a judge and a district attorney, we look at it on all three levels, whether you're a judge, a DA, or a sheriff. You have to balance an individual's First Amendment right to free speech and to protest peaceably. And you have to measure that and balance that against protests that become violent, disorderly, disruptive, and chaotic, and create risks and harm to individuals and to property. In this particular case, I have to commend Chicago and all levels of government that planned security. They had the outer ring, they had an inner ring, and they had the convention and building itself, convention hall. So they did a very good job. They had one incident that bordered, and they made 50 arrests plus, which had to do with tearing down a fence and disorderly conduct and protesting, where it became more of a mini riot, if you want to say. Fortunately, no one was injured to the extent that they were hospitalized or anything of that nature. So as a prosecutor, the sheriff, you want to protect the rights of those to protest, and you want to protect the rights of those who are convention goers, citizens, staff, who are working from being assaulted or harassed or intimidated. They did a very good job at balancing both of those. As a judge, you want, if somebody of the 50 people that were arrested, you wanted to take into account what the nature of the charges were, whether they were simply failure to disperse, whether they were disorderly conduct, or whether they were criminal mischief. Obviously, failure to disperse and disorderly conduct are not as serious as criminal mischief and causing damage to public property or to private property. So as a judge, you would balance that. You would look at an individual's record, and you would go from there. I think that it sets a good standard to be looked at. And I can tell you that I believe part of it is motivated by the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. I think that it put the Secret Service, the FBI, federal, state, and local partners on heightened awareness to be sure something of that nature didn't happen in Chicago. So it's a combination of factors. I think they had a well planned security program, and they executed it well. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Jason Bermas.
We are now joined by former New York State Judge Rich Giardino. He is the host of the Rich Giardino Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before the break, we've never really met or talked, but you are in upstate New York. It's kind of my stomping grounds, where I went to high school over in Fort Plain. I actually went to college in SUNY Oneonta, about an hour away from there, so I'm very familiar with the region. How's it holding up? I was just actually in Albany at the end of July. I was in Troy and all these other places. Not so much loving it. I made my exodus during the COVID 1984 nightmare. But one of the things that really did concern me, and I'll never forget it, it was on the eve of January 1st when catch and release was first going into play. And somebody off the James Lettuce Highway had actually been run down. So this person, they weren't killed on the spot, but they were later, dead after being taken in. And the person that did it, they didn't even have a license. Now, they didn't have any violent crime or anything, but they had a ton of different tickets, driving without a license. And I remember that person did not spend a moment in jail. They're like, well, this goes into play tomorrow. They wrote them a ticket and let them drive off illegally. It was the wildest thing. And that was a microcosm for what you started to see more and more throughout New York State, which unfortunately ends up being beholden to these insane policies that are driven through the city, no?
It's crazy, because what happens, it's all driven by New York City, and all started with one misdemeanor case that the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the judges, and the jail staff didn't catch, and a kid spent 2 years in Rikers Island, committed suicide, so they changed the whole system, turned it on its head. It's disgusting what happens. We've had people arrested 3, 4, 5 times, and we have to give them appearance tickets, and they know it. They know it. It's no different than when Kamala Harris advocated for the $990 thefts in California, that you only charge with a misdemeanor instead of a felony. So you did the right thing getting out of New York. And what's sad, Jason, is Jason and I, his high school is half an hour from where I live. So the next county, which is unbelievable that we met this way. But what's unbelievable is we're rural counties in upstate New York, and every time there's an election, 56, 57 of the counties in this state vote for the Republican candidate for governor, and the Democrats carry New York City, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester, and the numbers win it. And if this is the people that's hurt by this are the people that the advocates in Albany and the legislators tried to help. It's the minority community, because that's where crime is hitting the hardest, and they're letting repeat offenders out over and over again. It's terrible, Jason.
And a lot of people don't get this. If you're not from New York, you have only seen movies and television. Everybody thinks the entire state is like the city. Yep. I always tell people, if you look at my fist, literally my thumbnail is the city, and there's about 10 million people in that area, 10 million people in the rest of the area, but culturally extremely different. However, I will say this, Albany used to be a sleepier capital. It has really expanded out where I mentioned Troy, New York, but even Rensselaer in that area, it's becoming more urbanized, I would say, unfortunately, not in a good way. It's not like it's bringing higher wages and higher jobs. And that's the thing. In those areas where, I graduated with like 55 kids, there are a lot of people in poverty, and there isn't a ton of economic opportunity. And one of the things we've seen in this administration in particular is the fact that they've not only encouraged but enabled illegal immigration into those type of areas. And, one of the most egregious examples was the Tyson Food Factory, where, again, it's tough to make a living in New York State anywhere. But now you're shutting down factories in Iowa. You're keeping the ones open in New York, but you're hiring migrants at $16.25 an hour. No benefits. The only benefit is that they buy their lawyers to make sure they stay in the country. I mean, this is open and arrogant treason on so many levels. And you're a judge, and a former prosecutor. How have we gone this far?
It's based on these principles that feel good and sound good. We didn't ask the sheriffs. They didn't ask the judges. They didn't ask the DAs. They didn't ask probation, parole, and mental health. to meet with them. They just says, we got to change the bail laws because too many people are going to jail. Well, it's got to be the right people. And the problem is, the purpose of bail is to ensure their return. Well, if they're out recommitting crimes, they don't deserve to be out there. And you mentioned the car driving down the guy in New York. That's a nonviolent felony. You seriously injure somebody, even in a drunk driving accident, that's a nonviolent vehicular assault, and it's up to 4 years. But you get bailed out because it's a nonviolent felony. It's ridiculous. And we're seeing it case after case. Sadly, you're very spot on about Albany and some of the other areas turn microcosms of the cities and of very urban areas. This college girl was hit and struck by a kid on a mini bike in the park, and she has a traumatic brain injury. They finally caught the person, but not only is that a city problem, it's graduated up to upstate, and it becomes an Albany city problem in bigger cities. So we see that it's like I said, the biggest problem is they didn't ask any of us, what's your opinion? Because we all agree with criminal justice reform, and I'm speaking about law enforcement and DAs, and we all agree with tweaking bail, but making it appropriate so that people aren't punished because they don't have money. But we have to protect the public. We're the only state in the country that doesn't have public safety bail. Public safety is if somebody's a danger to others, like shoving people into the subway. They get bail set on them, but they don't get bail high enough, and they don't get incarcerated without bail, even if they're considered a danger.
And, again, one of the other alarming aspects was also the release of individuals that had already been convicted. So retroactively, they were putting criminals out, not were, still are putting criminals out into the streets of New York. Now, kind of getting into the subject matter of today, these are, unfortunately, the politics driven by the modern Democratic Party. And I'm no Republican. I hate them all. I think that they are terrible. I'm not about right and left. There's common sense, right and wrong, and that's really been turned on its head. And when you look at Harris and walls on crime, you can only see more of these type of policies spreading throughout the country.
You're right. And I call it the Jardino test, which I developed after 30 years as a professor in college and law school and as a DA, a prosecutor, and now a sheriff. And the Jardino test is simple. If you're passing legislation in criminal justice, does it make law-abiding citizens safer? And if the answer is no, then you don't pass it. And so many of these laws don't make things safer for the law-abiding citizens. In New York, Jason, you're lucky you got out. You know that if you're raped in your household or you're robbed at gunpoint or you're beaten up in your household and somebody burglarizes you, they can make an application to the court to have the defendant walk through your house and check out your house. How does that feel if you're a victim of rape or robbery or burglary? It's a system that they design out of New York City, out of bad policies, and they don't think of the consequences to real people and real victims. Our state turned itself in 1994 when O.J. Simpson was accused of murdering his wife. Now, remember, he was acquitted in the criminal trial. They passed the Domestic Violence Act, and they started protecting victims and giving victims the right to speak and things. These laws stay away from any input from victims. They don't really do justice to the people who are harmed violently. And we're going to see more of it with Kamala Harris and Walz if they get elected. People don't understand that. They might be talking law enforcement now, but when she was the DA in California and the Attorney General, he advocated for the rule about the $900 that you can steal and still not go to jail. She talked about defunding, but she called it refunding, reassigning the money to other programs and defunding the police. Those are things that people of all colors, all races, all religions, all politics, they want to be safe. They want good police officers. There's bad apples like in any profession, but you don't penalize all the police and you don't make it a profession that we can't retain anyone and we can't recruit anyone because nobody wants to be a police officer if the first thing is you got to worry about the Attorney General of your state prosecuting you. It's crazy.
We got to take a break. When we come back, I want to hit on that because, like you said, any system with human beings is going to be imperfect and you are going to have bad apples, but constantly trying to make police brutality issues about race or, the politic of the day are just not the way to handle it. And going after police officers constantly for doing their job. I mean, I've seen some of these videos. It's over the top. Why would you want to have that job? Personally, I don't want the job in the first place. We'll get into that and so much more on the other side of the headlines. It's TNT.
Good.
Come on, let the man talk.
We never censor our hosts.
Good. Now, talk.
Uncensored news.
Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT.
I would argue again, in any institution, especially when you wield power over others, you're going to have some level of corruption. You're going to have bad apples. However, over the years, I've had a lot of police officers be my friends and personally try to recruit me. Say, hey, why don't you come do this? You're doing this now. I think you'd make a good police officer. I always said this. I'm like, I don't want to do what you do. I'm like, that is like my biggest nightmare, to have to deal just on the level of domestic disputes. Again, people have this really weird idea of what the job of a police officer is. They watch a lot of true crime shows or Law and Order. They don't realize, number one, there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of sitting around. But when you are dealing with people, sometimes you're dealing with the worst of the worst. It's not one time. It's not two. You're going there 3, 4, 5 times a week for the most petty stuff. And it's draining. I don't not only want to deal with those people, but then be put in a situation with real crime where I have to act. And then if I act in the wrong way or the right way, and it's the wrong person, all of a sudden I could be criminally prosecuted. To me, hats to you, man. Good luck with all that. That's not my shebango, Rich.
So, Jason, let me give you 2 quick points. We in law enforcement, sheriffs, chiefs, DAs, have to admit that after over 200 years, young black males have always been at the losing end of a baton or a boot by police. Things have changed. Look at the videos from 1968 in Chicago, and it's funny because Mick Daly, his famous quote was, "The police aren't there to cause disruption and chaos. They're there to preserve disruption and chaos." So he mixed his words like a George Bush thing. But what we need to do, and I've always said this, people like me, we've got to speak up and say, look, we understand why young black males are suspect of police. But when you hear the study out of California that across the country from 2008 to 18, 1,000 police officers were killed in violent confrontations, 40% of those individuals who killed the police officers were young black males. Now, you take a population of 12% in the country and less than 2% being young black males, you can understand why there's that distrust between the young blacks and the police. Now, add on top of that, Charles Woody, who's a retired police officer from Binghamton, New York. He's a biracial officer, and he makes an excellent point. He says, we take young men and women out of rural areas. We hire them for police departments because they're new. They go on the night shift. All they deal with is drunks, drug addicts, problems, domestic violence, and burglaries. So they learned that every potential incident could create a problem, life for them, to preserve their life or somebody else's. So they're heightened awareness. And the first thing they do is, after being at a high school with very few biracial or minority students, they now are enforcing against young black males, and they become suspect. Now, after 3 years of doing that, you put them on the day shift. They don't know how to relate everyday people going about their business. And it's all a mindset from the first 3 years. I got to be careful in dealing with them. So they bring that mindset, if you will, for the days. So you got to understand those 2 things. But now in New York City, it's first $20,000 of a lawsuit the police officer's got to pay out of his own pocket. It's ridiculous. We used to have this thing called qualified immunity. That if I'm doing my job and somebody gets hurt, and the government, my city, my county has to protect me. The other thing you said that's super important is we see these clips, and people don't understand. Every year in this country, it's less than 20. One is too many, but it's less than 24 young black males are shot and killed by police officers unwarranted. And it goes back to what a lot of the commentators say, and they say this. They say, well, I got to teach. You don't know, because I got to tell my kid, just say yes to the police. Do what the police tell you. You don't have to worry about that. But here's what I say. If you look at all these shootings and incidents with police on video, drop the gun, drop what's in your hand, stop the car, get out of the car. They don't stop the car. They don't get out of the car. They don't drop whatever's in their hand. Young black male has been shot for cell phones because the police officer drop what's in your hand and they can't see what it is, and they turn. Police officers shouldn't have to wait to get shot at first before they protect themselves. So you can see there's a lot of dynamics, Jason, that goes into this. But I have a hard time when I see these young kids come in, they're idealistic, they want to be police officers, and they've watched Cops or Live PD, but they don't understand that you're dealing with people at their worst in their life. And then they got to see children dying in car accidents. They got to tell parents that their sons aren't coming home because they've been shot, killed, stabbed, or injured in some other way. And it wears on you, it's a lot of depression, a lot of young deaths with police officers.
Again, that is one of the many reasons that I didn't want to get into law enforcement. Again, it's all fun and games until it's your life too, and it's every single day. Like you said, there's a lot of ups and downs. I'm sure there's a lot of good feelings when helping people, but like you said, you're dealing with a lot of people at the worst moments in their life. That being said, we got a couple minutes left in the segment. And, you talked about how really not only is upstate New York, and there's a lot of upstate New York, is beholden to these city politics. Trump has talked about New York State actually being in play this year. Do you think that there's a chance, or do you think, number one, there's just too many liberals out there that are going to vote, or has the system become so corrupt, in my opinion, that we haven't had free and fair elections in many, many years, and we certainly haven't been able to audit New York elections?
Let's put it this way. In every election, on every level, there's some bit of fraud, whether it's signing grandma's absentee ballot or sending something in for somebody else where you mark it up. So there's always a certain level. I think New York is in play, but I want to mention two quick things to you. Every time you hear the Democrats say crime is down, violent crime is down, the FBI went to a new reporting system in 2021. 25 of the largest police agencies in the country, with over 250,000 plus populations, each of the 25 aren't reporting. So you don't have the statistics that are real. So they rely on partial reporting. And you can go to the FBI website and see this. And so you're getting a skewed message. If 25 of the largest cities aren't reporting the violent crimes every day, how can it be realistic? So you got this false sense that crime is down. The numbers are down. Crime is not down. Number two, I always say this. Law enforcement, and I thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. But I say this to all the young law enforcement officers, and I say this to the public. Law enforcement is the only profession where you shoot bottle rockets at us, you ambush us, you say fry them up like pigs, you throw frozen bottles at us, you throw rocks at us, you call us pigs, you hope we die, you say it in the street. When you call 911 and the dispatcher says, what's your name, where are you, and what's your emergency? And the police respond. And we respond. We don't say, what color are you? What's your politics? We don't say to them, what's your religion? How do you identify today? We go. And we're the only profession that does that. Despite people and the politicians who have made this, who have diminished the importance and the professionalism of police by attacking us.
Everybody check out the Rich Giardino Show. And, I got to say, Mayfield was always rough in soccer, baseball, and basketball. I don't know if that's the case these days, but I assume that it still might be. Plenty of corn-fed boys and girls out there. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. 2 hours flies by.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I think going forward, what we have to do is continue to be on heightened alert due to the rhetoric which is still out there on both sides, which could cause mentally unstable individuals to be disruptive, make attempts on candidates' lives, or do other things that are disruptive on a widespread range. I think, if anything, there's no organized plots that have been shown or uncovered. I think they're individuals, lone wolf types, and we've been warned about those in our country, and they're usually sparked by online theories, conspiracy theories, or radicalization. So those are things that we have to look forward to do it right. I also want to talk to you for a few minutes about my interview with Steve Lance from Epoch Times. Steve interviewed me about the status of the Trump assassination investigation, and we interviewed the same day that Congress voted unanimously and jointly, bipartisanship at its best, to have a congressional investigation with subpoena powers and powers of contempt for those who did not participate. Since we filmed our interview at Times, a few things have happened. One, the congressional committee has gone to the site of the assassination attempt, got on the roof themselves, moved around. They've had testimony. There was some compelling testimony just the other day from one of the sniper team members from the local who said that it's too many weaknesses and too many holes in this to be that one individual did it without assistance. He said the holes and the weaknesses rise to greater than just negligence or incompetence. It's almost a willful neglect. He didn't make any finger pointing as to who, but he did say that there were so many errors in judgment that it bordered on malpractice and, again, intentional lack of doing one's due diligence. I hope you enjoy the interview with Steve from Epic Times, NDT News, Capitol Report, and he does that on a daily basis, Monday through Friday. It was an interesting interview, and I thank him for the opportunity.
And as the House task force probes the assassination attempt on former President Trump, Trump himself is publicly praising the Secret Service agents who took quick action when those shots were fired. Joining me now to discuss the House investigation and its implications is Richard Giardino, Sheriff of Fulton County, New York, a former New York State judge and prosecutor, and host of the podcast, The Rich Giardino Show. Richard Giardino, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you on, Richard. So the House task force investigating the attempted assassination, just requesting documents and briefings from Homeland Security, Secret Service, and the AG, as well as the FBI. What is the significance of this for the investigation?
Well, twofold. They put a deadline on it, so they want it by the end of August. They want it quickly. There's been a sense that the Secret Service and other agencies are dragging their feet, and the Secret Service in the beginning tried to point the finger at the locals for any mistakes that occurred, including protecting the building from which the shooter launched his attack. So by moving quickly, they're able to squelch some of these rumors. There's a lot of rumors and a lot of conspiracy theories, and I think the Secret Service doesn't understand the longer they drag this on, the more conspiracy theories go out. So they have precedence. This congressional committee is bipartisan. It was a 416 vote, no votes against it, and it's Democrats and Republicans on the committee, including veterans. So they're looking to try to wrap this up, and they want answers because it could have been a completed assassination attempt, and unfortunately, a man did die because of this. So they want to know answers that have been the Secret Service hasn't been that forthcoming on.
We saw that body cam footage from the local police released. How damaging, or at least what do you think this will mean for the investigation? And what information is this task force specifically looking for?
I think what happened is in the first couple days, the Secret Service was pointing the finger at the locals. And I think that the local district attorney, a local supervisor, and local supervisor of the police, the chief, came out and supported his team and staff, said, time out. We didn't get good directions from the Secret Service. We highlighted the rooftop as a vulnerable place. We had people inside, but not on top. And that's where they were directed to go. So I think the release of the body camera is damning to the Secret Service because the officers, in excited utterance right after the shooting, say, we told you guys, we haven't told you guys. And several officers mentioned that. So you can see that in the heat of the moment, people say, in court, we call it excited utterance. You see something, you shout out, oh my God, he went through the red light. Or, oh my God. So they immediately say something that's more credible and believable because they don't have time to think about it. So it's clear that there was notification by the locals to the Secret Service before the event. And during the event, we're learning that they were watching this kid and they had relayed the information to a command center of local, state, and Secret Service. But apparently it fell on deaf ears when it got to the Secret Service because one of the officers said that he couldn't believe that no backup was coming to help find this kid.
There were certainly a lot of mixed messages coming out, like the one you just pointed out, as well as the initial statement that the roof was too sloped, and then that was the reason why there wasn't a sniper position there. There's been a lot of public speeches that former President Trump has given in this past month where he commends the rank and file Secret Service agents. Specifically last night, he really got into depth when he was doing his back and forth with Elon Musk, really praising that sniper, the Secret Service sniper who took out the shooter. What do you make of his praise thus far for the actual Secret Service members on the ground?
You have to understand, when you're assigned a protective detail, they become close. Their families become close. And I think it's dependent on the president. And he recognizes the fact that, it could have had a worse ending. There's also been some criticism of why did they let him stand up? Why did they let him, wave his arms and expose the target? He is the target. They don't know how many shooters there were. But all in all, I think that we have to take our protective details, the ones that work with us every day, and assume that they're there to protect us, and they would take a bullet for the president. So I understand why you would commend those. I think there's been a failure from the top down.
Richard Giardino, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Steve. Have a good week. Thank you for watching that clip. As I review it, and then I take a quick look at it with my hat as a former district attorney, I would be very concerned the lack of transparency, the lack of what it appears to be knowledge of what the plan was on the ground. I do believe that an individual, now they've told us he has challenges. They told us there have been some overseas cryptic websites he was on. We don't know if that's helped radicalize him or if he was dealing with other individuals. But he was at the range 43 times, a range that was in the same county, the same range that Homeland Security and federal officials use for their practice, 43 times, including within a couple of days of the assassination attempt itself or the day before. So that's important. They have not released things, and the longer they withhold information, and the less information they release, the more it leads to conspiracy theories, and the more conspiracy theories, the grayer the area is, and the less believability is when they release their completed report. You have to remember, in this case, there's several different layers. One is the FBI and Secret Service internal investigations and law enforcement's internal investigations. Then there's the external investigation of the shooter himself. And then there's congressional investigations as to failures and how something like this could happen. So a lot going on. As a judge, it would be issuing judicial subpoenas for a lot of evidence and search warrants. Some questions have arisen recently that they gave the body up without the coroner's approval, and he was cremated within 10 days. A case of this national importance and this serious, trying to take out a president of the United States, a former president, and a candidate for president, has a lot of implications. And everything should be done to preserve the evidence, not destroy it, to preserve potential evidence, including the body of the gunman. There were some claims by local police that Secret Service were on the roof, mopping and cleaning up the roof. Although they did take the gun and some other evidence, you never know what might be useful. So you may want to cover the roof with a tarp and have people on it for a few days, because you may uncover information that you didn't think was important initially that may lead to other leads. As a sheriff, I am proud of law enforcement on a local level. I'm proud of the mayor and the legislators who stood up, and the sheriff and the police chief who stood up and said, stop pointing the finger at the locals. We warned you. And in fact, if you listen to our interview, very compelling was the fact that there were body-worn cameras of local police saying, what the F? We told you. What the F? Where the F were you? We asked for help. So there's a lot of failures from comms or communications, as we call it, to the plan in place, to actual discussions ahead of times. It's almost like a shotgun approach. We now know that some Secret Service with the Pittsburgh office, or Philadelphia office, have been suspended. We don't know why, but they have been suspended. What needs to be is a clear and transparent investigation. It's got to be done quickly, but not too fast so that you miss anything. And when I say quickly, it may take a matter of a couple months, but it's got to be done right and not fast. But it's got to be done so that the public has confidence in the conclusion of the investigation. I think the bipartisan committee, congressional committee, will do that because everyone in Congress agreed we need to do this. We need to protect our candidates and our future presidents. In any event, I'd like to thank Steve Lance for having me on the Capitol Report and Jason Bermas for having me on TNT Radio. Please listen to them, and share the clips we have today. I want to thank you for listening to the Rich Giardino Show. It's an honor and a privilege to serve you as such. Remember, this is where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. We're on Apple, X, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and many other premium level platforms. I ask you to like, share, and subscribe. YouTube is a free subscription to watch our channel there. The other ones, some are a combination of free. Others have a small fee, but if you're already on Spotify or X or Apple, then it's just something you add without cost. Until next week, stay safe. Thank a law enforcement officer, an EMT, fire, corrections officer, a dispatcher, and anyone else involved in public safety to protect you and your family every day.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.